Ladies and gentlemen, they got him. Nick Polk is joining the Florida Gators front office.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Happy Tuesday. I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. And the Florida Gators have made their official hire. It's Nick Polk, and it's interesting because we were told it wouldn't be a general manager job. But when the Florida Gators officially announced the hire yesterday, but they hired him yesterday, and then the Florida Gators football Twitter account tweeted out the graphic, which is usually how a lot of people go, oh, now it's official. They tweeted it out as Nick Polk, Associate AD, so Associate Athletic Director, / football GM. That leaves me with two questions. One, the Associate AD part. We've kind of heard this talked about before, and we've seen other teams take this approach, other schools take this approach, that you have your AD, and then you get an Associate AD of football or above a football program, that essentially the AD now takes a step back, and they focus on the other parts of the school. And then the Associate AD essentially just takes the reins of football there. So hopefully that means that Scott Strickland will step away from football a little bit, hopefully. But also, I'm very curious what it means as far as Jacob LaFrance, because Jacob LaFrance is currently listed as the Florida Gators general manager, but Nick Polk has now taken that. And a week or two ago, we were told, we're not expecting much to happen with Jacob LaFrance. Like he's still going to be there. He's still going to be the GM. He's still going to have all that. So I'm very curious what that means for Jacob LaFrance and Scott Strickland. I'm assuming we'll get answers eventually. But yeah, I'm very, very curious to see how that plays out. But Nick Polk, who was the hire, was the Atlanta Falcons director of football operations for the final, I believe it was 5 years of his tenure with the Atlanta Falcons. He was there for 17 years. He was a key part in managing their cap, which I will say this. Being a key part in managing a program's cap or an NFL team's cap is not the same thing as being the GM, is not the same thing as deciding how much people make. It's not that. I would imagine that it's more, or not even imagine, that it's more about determining the value you should be willing to spend, how much money you should allocate to certain positions, how much money you should allocate to starter at this position, backup at this position, and work out all that. And have a lot of say in things, but not be the final word. I want to make that abundantly clear. I will also say this, and I'm not saying that Nick Polk was good or bad at this, and teams have gotten way more creative with how they attack contracts in the past few years. But for me, when I look at current front office members of the NFL, I also look at their ability to get out of contracts, like the Daniel Jones contract. Daniel Jones did not deserve a contract extension. John Mara essentially forced it, which led Saquon to leave to the Philadelphia Eagles and win a Super Bowl. Congratulations, Saquon. Hate everything else about it. Going to be honest with you. But Joe Schoen at least did a good thing of making sure it was a contract that the Giants could get out of after the second season. At least there was that. It was a bad deal, I get that, but that's also a thing where it's important when we talk about these NFL executives and NFL minds that we're going to continue talking about in college football in modern day because they're so similar now. It's important to acknowledge that there's levels to it, right? he never signs a bad contract, or he never overpays, or hey, he might overpay, but he gives them an out. That's also an important part of this. So that's important as well. Nick Polk has a reputation for being just meticulous. I reached out to as many people as I could that might have a connection to Nick Polk. Okay. I want you, the hire got made, or the hire got announced, and I was in the texting and Twitter DMs for hours after that. Okay. We were talking about him. I did my best to get firsthand accounts on Nick Polk. I am especially interested to see how his NFL Europe experience plays in here. And I think that's important to acknowledge, because Nick Polk was with NFL Europe, and NFL Europe, of course, was an experience, as we'll say short-lived as it was compared to, the NFL and everything, as short-lived as it was, but it was a whole new world, right? It was a whole new world of football. Now we're basically in a whole new world of college football. We are. It's a whole new era. I know that I mention it a lot, but do you know why I mention it a lot? Why I mention that college football has changed and has become very NFL-like? Do you know why I mention it? Because I still get the comments about it that are, the old days were better. That's fine if that's your opinion. It doesn't change that we're in a new era. This is not the era that you, myself, or even if you have a 6-year-old, this is not the era that anybody there grew up with. Okay? This is different. And the Florida Gators, again, as critical as I've been about a lot of things, I think they're taking the right approach here. Okay? And Nick Polk, he's been in a whole new world before. He's been in a whole new environment before. In fact, he's done it kind of multiple times on a personal level. Going with NFL Europe, and then climbing the ladder with the Falcons, and then going to athletes first, where he was since leaving the Falcons. He's been there. He's done a lot of unique things. He's been in unique situations, and so for him to help Florida get ushered into this new era of college football, I think it's a big plus. I'm not going to lie to you. And also, as far as an overseer of football operations, that's huge. I think he'll do a good job there. And like I mentioned, he was with Athletes First previously. So to me, and we talked about this a lot last week, a lot of things are about who you know, right? And if you were with Athletes First, which is one of the largest sports agencies on the planet, I'd say they're probably top 3 or 4 sports agencies in football right now. It's Rosenhaus, it's Athletes First, it's Clutch. I'm sure I'm overlooking some, CAA maybe. The one with the W, Wasserman maybe, something like that. There's some power agencies. Athletes First is one of them. Okay, Athletes First has a lot of people making a lot of money on that team. So that will maybe help Florida, because Athletes First does represent some college players. That will maybe help Florida when it comes time to negotiating, when it comes time to figuring out actual value, when it comes time to, getting a little nudge and like, hey, this guy might hit the portal. Could help the Florida Gators. And there's a lot going on with this hire that we'll talk about when we get back with Locked On Gators. After the holiday hustle, there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC, and I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back to a routine. You'll notice it if you watch in the background. You'll notice I do a little bit of refreshing my space, right? From the start of YouTube to now, from the start of me being on YouTube to now, background has changed incredibly. Desk has changed, which you haven't seen, but then we changed some things here and there in the background. It happens. I'm changing my living room right now. We're redoing the whole thing, and I know I said this after New Year's. We're still doing it. We're still deciding things, and I thank you for the advice of, hey, she picks, you say yes. Cool. I get it. We've been using Wayfair a ton. Okay. We have. They've got everything that we need all within our budget. We're not millionaires yet. I'm not Stephen A. Smith out here. Not millionaires. Wayfair helps. Free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items. I don't live on the first floor, all right? I live in New York City. We got floors to this. It ain't easy for someone like me. I'm 5'11", 170 to carry a couch up. I'm just saying, give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day, every day. We are available daily and free, whether it's in the podcast and on YouTube. And we're still talking about Nick Polk here. And we'll talk about Ben Elsner and Nick Polk working together in the next segment. But I wanted to take everybody back to January 6th, 2025. Okay? If you go back to the Locked On Gators episode from January 6th, 2025, do you know what you're going to hear? Because what you're going to hear is me talk about the Florida Gators candidates that they were interviewing for this role. There were 4 that we talked about. Okay? And there was one that I said, hey, that would be my guy. That when looking at the resume and looking at where he's been, what he's done, and trying to piece together what kind of impact he would have on a program, there was one guy that I said, that would be my hire. That would be my favorite. That would be my guy. That guy's name, Nick Polk. You can go back and watch it again, January 6th, 2025. You can go back and look at that episode and watch me say that Nick Polk is my favorite. He would be my hire. Okay? And part of that, again, is his reputation or is his resume. Almost 2 decades of experience with one team. Being a major part in NFL front offices. Nothing to scoff at. And I say that because I understand, and I've seen people on Twitter say it, and I've seen people in the subtext program, the insider program, which links in the description below. I've seen it all of people saying, hey, he was with the Falcons. I hate it. First off, no. That's simply not how it works, that just because they were with the Falcons, it doesn't mean anything, okay? He was a part of our program, but here's the thing. I can't think of a single place, football especially, or sports especially, we'll say, but I can't think of a single place where I can look and say, politics maybe actually, where I can look and say, hey, you've been there for 2 decades and you've been bad and you've climbed your way up. I can't think of a single place in sports where we can look and say you've been bad for 2 decades, but you've consistently climbed up the ladder. I can't think of it. And so for me, like, I understand people say the Atlanta Falcons. Don't forget, Nick Polk was with the Atlanta Falcons when they made it to the Super Bowl. Okay? Nick Polk was there. Nick Polk was there for that, not Nick Folk. Nick Folk was not there. Nick Folk was, I think, with the Jets at the time. Maybe Patriots. But Nick Polk was there. So I don't want to hear that it's the Falcons. In fact, Nick Polk was there after the general manager got fired. Nick Polk made it past. Like, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a guy who was with a regime for a long time. And when that regime got the boot, he didn't. I think that's a really important factor. I think that's, or actually not even factor, fact. I'll end the or. It's a fact, because there's no either or about it. It's a fact. He was good enough for that. That's big, okay? Like, that's a huge thing to be a holdover from a long regime. If it's a couple years, there's not real loyalty there. But to be there for that long and then outlast the GM there, that's important, okay? And again, you can't be anywhere for 2 decades, keep your job, and climb the ladder consistently. He's done that. And I think that when we talk about building this team, You need guys that are going to be able to stick through a process and have seen the top. That's why we talked about Jim Nagy yesterday. And Jim Nagy, 4 Super Bowl rings that he was on a staff for, 4 Super Bowl wins. I look at that and I say, okay, that's I'm not going to lie to you. That's pretty impressive. Like, you've been there, you've seen wins. To be there for a building process and to see how a team got there, because again, when he got to the Falcons, they weren't good. And I'm not saying he's responsible for the turnaround. I'm saying that he saw a team that was not good build to be a Super Bowl team. That's important. Okay. And look, it's still going to be Billy Napier doing a lot of the work. Nick Polk does have college football coaching experience, and so maybe that'll play a part with recruiting. But it's still going to be Billy Napier and the coaching staff doing a lot of the work here. But it will likely be up to Nick Polk to decide the resources getting allocated there. Okay. It'll likely be up to Nick Polk to decide, hey, this is how much we're going to invest in these positions, because he's dealing with rev share, which is coming in, which each team is going to get to spend X amount of money every year. And it's going to change similar to a salary cap. You're going to need to have someone with that experience that can adjust to that and prepare for that. You need foresight for it. Okay. You need to be able to go, hey, like we expect the cap to go up 2 million next year. Let's prepare for this. You need to be prepared for that. That's an important thing. Okay. Nick Polk, I think, will help with that. And I am very optimistic to see what Nick Polk does at the University of Florida here. And again, this is a guy that I said I would hire. I love the hire, and I'm not trying to sunshine pump here. I genuinely just love these hires. And again, I love the fact that he's going to be paired with Ben Elsner. I think they can do a lot together. We'll talk about that when we get back with Locked On Gators. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. To wrap up today's show, we are still talking about Nick Polk and Ben Elsner. Ben Elsner got hired last week to oversee football, the director of football operations. Maybe not. We'll see his official title right now, because I don't want to get that wrong, because they've changed the titles, of course, because at first it wasn't a general manager and then it was a general manager and things changed. Nick Polk got associate AD, football general manager, and Benjamin Elsner, director of football strategy. So that's where we're going with there. And I've mentioned Thomas Dimitroff a few times with the Atlanta Falcons. He was the general manager for a long time. There's a couple of things here that I do think have layers to them, okay? So Nick Polk was with the Atlanta Falcons for a long time, and that means that he was with Thomas Dimitroff for a long time. Thomas Dimitroff, after getting fired by the Atlanta Falcons as the general manager, started Sumner Sports, okay? Sumner Sports is an analytics firm that not only works with every NFL team, but that people from Sumner Sports have been poached by NFL teams to run their analytics department. Okay? Eric Eager got poached by the Carolina Panthers to run the analytics department. We've seen that happen with multiple people from Sumner Sports now. And I'm just saying that to add some validity to the name Sumner Sports. You may not know it, but trust me, it's relevant, okay? And so Sumner Sports, an analytics firm, which Ben Elsner, big analytics guy, right? Thomas Dimitroff obviously valued analytics. That's part of the roster building process. That's part of his roster building process. And I think you could argue he was one of the first general managers to actually use analytics in building the roster. Okay? I am expecting this front office to take analytically driven decisions. Okay? I'm expecting that from this front office. And I would expect nothing less from them. I am curious if Nick Polk has a similar mindset to Thomas Dimitroff, which I think he does. I truly think he does. And I can assume that Ben Elsner has a similar mindset there. And so I'm looking at this as what we talked about on Friday with the roster building process, and I feel really good about this. We are going to see the Florida Gators invest heavily in the premium positions. We talk about it all the time on this show. Thomas Dimitroff is the reason that I talk about it all the time. Quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, pass rusher, outside cornerback. Those are the 5 building blocks, the 5 pillars, the 5 truly premium positions where if you have good players at those positions, you likely have a good football team. I think they might take it even one step further here. And I spoke about this briefly on Friday, where we can talk about, hey, I'd rather have an above average edge rusher than a really good off-ball linebacker, because an edge rusher that's an above average edge rusher is going to make a bigger impact than a really good linebacker, because edge rusher just makes so much more of an impact on the football game than an off-ball linebacker does. And so I think that we'll see the team over, we'll say, the next 2 years start to shift more towards that. And don't forget, like, they've still done this, okay? They've still prioritized getting good quarterbacks, blue chip receivers. Not so much on the O-line, but they've been swinging on potential on the O-line. It's very clear there, which is a fine approach. Edge rusher, similar, which I honestly, I think they're bad at scouting edge rushers for the most part, at least coming out of high school. They draft, or they sign a lot of rigid athletes there, and that's not super helpful when you're trying to build a dynamic edge rusher that's going to get after the quarterback. Outside cornerbacks, they've been signing for potential, and they've done a really good job there. So I do think that you see this front office start to take even more of that approach of, hey, we are really going to prioritize edge rusher. We're really going to prioritize corner, offensive tackle, wide receiver, quarterback, and we will figure out the rest later. Not bargain bin shopping. I want to make that clear. That's not what I'm implying. What I am implying is that if you have the choice between, hey, let's spend, I'm just going to throw a number out there. Hey, we have $500,000. We can either get a really good off-ball linebacker, or we can get an above-average edge rusher. I think that you will probably see them go for the edge rusher instead of the off-ball linebacker. I think that that's what we're going to talk about, because you're going to say, hey, there's more value in an edge rusher than an off-ball linebacker. There's more value in an above-average edge rusher than a great off-ball linebacker. When we get to the elite tier, maybe things change. But for the most part, I think we see the Florida Gators take that approach to building a team. And I know you can hear it I think you can hear it, I'll say, with the enthusiasm, the speed at which I talk, and the volume at which I talk about things sometimes. I freaking love what they're doing with this front office, okay? Again, I've been super critical. I am still very skeptical of the coaching, but building the front office, they've done a damn good job. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day, every day. We are available daily and free wherever in the podcast and on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Florida Gators football. For Locked On Gators, I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work for New York Giants on SI, and I'll see you all next time.